Topics about Jenkins Job Builder and how to easily manage your jobs, your Jenkins jobs. How many of you attended Kai's presentation earlier? So I'm going to talk, there's a little bit overlap, but I'm going to go more in depth and some examples and dive into some of that in more detail. Kai did a good job of kind of the overview and a good, like, simple example. So I'm going to show you kind of how we use it at Red Hat. So my name's Ari LiVigni. I'm from Red Hat. I've been there for almost 2 years. I work, originally I started out kind of an essential CI team across all our product lines, and now I'm focused on our Project Atomic, Docker and Kubernetes, which I'm sure you've heard about a lot in the last couple days. So get started. So the agenda is we could talk about like challenges as you know, Jenkins users, you know, managing all the different jobs that we have, you know, what that entails. You know, here's a solution, Jenkins Job Builder. Hopefully it's a solution for you as well. It's definitely been an extremely useful automation tool for Jenkins jobs for our team and for Red Hat as a whole. As Kai kind of pointed out, it's an upstream OpenStack project. I'm going to dive into some of the job definitions and what, you know, each of the definitions means and the modules that you can use. And modules kind of corresponds to the different pieces that you have in a Jenkins job. You know, SCM, builders, wrappers, you know, post-build actions or publishers. Then I'm going to show some examples. I probably won't spend a huge amount of time on all the detail of the YAML code, but I'll try to touch on as much as possible just to kind of get the message across of what Jenkins Job Builder can do. And then I'm going to show an execution and a brief demo in the Jenkins environment so you can see what that looks like. And hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A. So as you start to, you know, create your Jenkins jobs, you know, it can get out of hand pretty quick. Definitely if you're messing with the UI, it's prone to human error or job drift unless you can back everything up, but obviously you don't want to have to restore everything from a backup. Also, there's a lot of redundancy. Some jobs are very similar, so if you could get away from having to basically repeat the same jobs or copy XML files, you want to do that. And you also, you know, another thing is the consistency and the source control of your jobs. You know, obviously, even if you back up your Jenkins master, it'd be great to have those jobs and some type of source control so you can not only, you know, keep them, you know, version controlled, but also if people want to make updates when they're changing maybe their dev code, they can also change a Jenkins job at the same time. And obviously the XML API and UI are very cumbersome to use for those purposes. And what if you had different masters or you wanted to share these jobs with another team in your company? Maybe you have a large company and you want to share those jobs. Jenkins Job Builder makes that very easy to do that. So the solution, Jenkins Job Builder. So it takes very simple descriptions of YAML, which is very human readable, and to configure Jenkins jobs. Like I said, you can keep it under version control, makes auditing of them very easy. You can keep them part of a system called Garrett, or maybe you have a review system where you review code. You can also review your Jenkins jobs that way. And it just is a more consistent way and less prone to human error. It supports a huge amount of plugins. It does not currently support the workflow plugin. I'm sure it will at some point, but there is a vast support for a lot of the plugins that people use. Yeah.
When you say that the management control, does it live alongside the developer's repository, or is it a separate repository?
You can do either or. So you could have these YAML files live where the dev code is, or you could have, say, maybe you have more of an operations repo where you have Puppet or Ansible types of scripts and you want to keep the YAML for your jobs with that. You could do that as well. There's no, you don't have to keep it in one or the other. So the definitions are kind of broken down into these different categories of definitions. A job is just a basic, you know, just like you think of a Jenkins job, it's very hard-coded text format, and you can definitely create your YAML that way. And then really kind of some of the power is when you use job templates. I'm going to actually link to this. I don't know if you can. There we go. So job templates are really useful because if you need several jobs defined, but you kind of want to just tweak certain parameters, and maybe it's an architecture or topology and you want to call it something different, or you want to use these things, the templates allow you to do that pretty easily. And then down here, the project is kind of a map, or the wrapper around all these variables that you create, which are macros, that allow you to then put those into the job template, define those in the project, and then it replaces them inside your job templates. And then you have a job group, which just helps you actually take a bunch of different job templates and group them together. So maybe you have a certain order of how you want these set up, and it just is a wrapper around that. That's a pretty basic definition in Jenkins Job Builder. So macros are just, I guess you consider them more like variables. So they're set up in a project, and then you can easily define what those are in that project definition that I just spoke about. And then those would then be replaced in a job template that you could use. And I'm going to show the examples of how you can use that. Defaults come in handy. Basically, you can set up some things that will, that you can use throughout all your Jenkins jobs or the job templates, and you don't want to have to reduplicate that code. It's more like, I guess I would equate it to having a library that has everything set up. So if there's a similar SEM that you want to use throughout many jobs, you can define a default, and then in your job template, you can just reference that. So it helps, limit the amount of lines of YAML that you have, and makes it also easy that you're not duplicating and having to change things in multiple places. You can update a template, update a default, and then it will take care of that for you. These are all the different types of modules that you can use. These names should look somewhat familiar from using Jenkins jobs. I'm going to concentrate on probably half of these or less than half of these for the example and the demo, just so you can definitely, there's links at the end for documentation. Jenkins Job Builder, the OpenStack community has a very good lengthy set of documentation and examples on how to use Jenkins Job Builder, which I just showed you in the previous stuff that I linked to. So freestyle project is just like, it's, just like when you go to set up a project, right? You can have matrix projects or multi-job. This just handles really a freestyle Jenkins project. Builders are the build steps that you can do. So if that's a shell build step or an injecting environment variables, those are considered build steps. Properties, you can have different types of elements inside your Jenkins jobs that you want to have as properties. Publishers, so one thing about Jenkins Job Builder that I wish there was more of a parallel with is the names that's in the UI sometimes, and they try to do that for the most part, but with publishers, that equals to post-build actions. So when you see publishers, just do equals post-build action there. And it helps define any of those things that you do after executing something in your build step as a post-build action. SEM is pretty self-explanatory, whether it's Git, multi-SEM, Mercurial or Perforce or any of those types of SEMs, that's how you would define them. Triggers, same thing, should look familiar, whether it's you're triggering off of some SEM change or a cron type of thing with a periodic build, or maybe you have some other mechanism as well. And then wrappers, which you would kind of know in the UI as a build environment. So these are things like, I want a timestamp in my log file, in my console log, I want to clean my workspace before I start. I want to, maybe I want to put a timeout on the build. These are what wrappers are considered. These, by the way, in here, you see all the blue, are just links to them. I'm not going to jump through all of them, but afterwards in the presentation, you can then go and look them up specifically. So the example that I'm going to show is basically a defaults file and kind of a sample file that has all my stuff for my jobs. You do not have to have the defaults separated from, you can have them in one file if you wanted to. I did it purely for showing the differences and showing you kind of, you can keep your defaults in one and your sample of all your job templates in the other one. And the defaults, like I said before, it just sets up things to be used by multiple jobs. Maybe you have 10 jobs in there and 3 of them use one type of default, another 3 use a different default, but you can define them all in one file. And it just really avoids the redundancy. Like I said, it's very similar to having a library in that sense. And then the workflow file contains the main jobs, and I'm using in the example that we're going to show is job templates and job groups to create many jobs. So I'm just going to link, we're just going to bring up this. Can everyone see that? Is that clear? Yes? Good? Okay. So up above here, you kind of define your default. And you can see the SCM is just like you would see in the UI. Here I'm setting up some defaults. At the top is the name of it, so that's going to be maybe something I call it. It could be whatever name you want there. The description is the same description that's going to pop into a Jenkins job. The SCM is right there. And then we have those wrappers, and I'm going to jump down to a wrapper here. So this is an example of a wrapper where I'm saying set my color of my output, clean up my workspace, and put timestamps in my log file. And within the top default there, I am referencing that other default for wrappers. And you can pretty much create, different publisher type of defaults this way. Maybe you want to group them together and roll them up. But that's essentially what allows you to do by setting those defaults up.
Does the order of sections matter?
It does not matter at all. As long as you're using the names, it picks up on the names. So when Jenkins Job Builder runs through, it will see that that wrapper name default CI workflow wrappers is called down below with that name. It will pick that up. And same here, the default we have for the CI workflow provision or down below the CI workflow run test, the other default, we're going to reference those in the other file that we have. Sure. So this is the sample. This is kind of the goods here. Is that here I have a job template at the top, and I'll get into this. These curly brackets around are what the macros are, and I'll get into those in a minute. But this is doing the provision, and here we're referencing the defaults is the second line in there that we had in the other file that tells us, okay, all the defaults that were defined in there, I'm going to just reuse them. So this way I don't have to now put SCM information in here. I don't have to put certain things that I know I'm going to use throughout all the jobs in here. I can just keep that. Same goes for parameters. If this was a default parameter and I didn't want to have it in here and I wanted to make it default, I could move it into the defaults and just reference it the same way I'm doing the other ones. And then I have this build step. In this case, I'm doing some provisioning of resources and Jenkins slaves with some other stuff that I wrote to provision resources and slaves. Then I have some publishers where I'm archiving my artifacts. Again, could be a default, but I put it in here this way. And then I'm triggering some downstream jobs. Also, almost missed, another build step, I'm injecting some environment variables from what resulted from my shell run. And then I'm triggering some downstream jobs. If I had success, I'm going to run some tests. If I had a failure, I'm going to go clean up those resources and call that teardown job. This is the run test template, very similar, but obviously the shell step is very different. There's no parameters in this job. The other thing to note is, in this case, I'm calling out node that I'm running on a Jenkins slave that is a macro that I define below. My other jobs are running on the master, but you can run that on any node. And then another publisher where I'm calling a downstream job to do the teardown of resources, get all the artifacts from running tests. And the other thing that I'm doing is I'm doing this DeFi workflow publishers that was in the other file that actually I can show you real quick. That's this guy. Oh. Let's go back to here. Sorry about that. All right. So in the default, I'll show you, is that I also have these publishers down below that I set up for one for sending out email, and then another one for producing XUnit results. And I'm actually going to call in that run test template. Skip. Yeah. And then at the end, this is just another template that does the teardown of the resources. And here's the job group that kind of groups them together. So now you can see I have a grouping of 3 templates. One that's going to provision resources, one that's going to run a set of tests, and one that's going to tear everything down at the end of it. And now I'm going to get into kind of this macros of how that works in the project. So we have these squiggly brackets of the project and topology being used here. In here, I'm calling it just a name for that. And then my project is called workflow. So that's what my project's called there. I've set up this project default name, which is another variable or another macro that can be replaced. And here are the topologies. So what this means is even though I have 3 job templates here, when I go to run this, it's actually going to create as many topologies, it's going to multiply by 3 of how many topologies I have there. So I think I have 4 there. So that's going to be 12 is going to be created as a result of that. And then these are other macros that you can also use that are part of this project definition. The JSlave name, which would replace the node up above. So just equate those kind of things to variables. That's basically what they are. So that really kind of shows as a layout. Obviously, I kind of ran through it. There's questions about it afterwards. We can go into more detail, but I kind of want to just give you an overview of how that works, and then we can. Also, I'm going to show you this other YAML file. This one here is actually, if you wanted to not just run Jenkins Job Builder on the command line, I think if you guys went to the session earlier, you can obviously do that on your system. But let's say you actually want to create a Jenkins job that does that to create other jobs. You can do that, and that's what I did here. Is it's a Jenkins job that updates other jobs, and it can be triggered off of a git change. So if there's a git change to your repo, it will automatically rerun this and then update any of those jobs. It could be git time or Gerrit or any of these other trigger events to do that. And I'm going to show you that real quick too. Oops. In this case too, I set up defaults within the same file. I didn't actually create 2 files. It's so small that I just threw it in one. And I created this job template. And what it did was, it's basically every 30 minutes, it's going to check if there was if there was every 30 minutes it's going to check if there was a change, and then it's going to update accordingly, and it's going to execute Jenkins Job Builder. But what it's going to do is it's going to go through each of these jobs here, and that's its idea, that it will then cycle through all these different jobs. This is similar to the demo I'm going to show you now. Obviously, I did less projects and kind of scale it down just to show more in Jenkins of how it works. But this is actually a file that we use in our production, that we have several projects that we need to update from time to time as changes have been made, and we run through that. And we just substitute this JJB underscore with those names that are up above. It just cycles through those. One more. All right. So executing Jenkins Job Builder, it's pretty straightforward, and Kai kind of covered this morning. Your ini file is pretty basic. You know, in this case, I don't have a username and password. It's just a test Jenkins that I'm using. But if you needed credentials there, you could put them in this file. If you were doing it in the job that I just showed you, you'd probably want to use mask passwords and use some credential binding type of thing to hide that information. Or you could use Jenkins global variables and then use global passwords, and you could do it that way as well. That's actually how we do it. But different ways to do it. It's definitely there's flexibility there. These are the options that you can run with it. So you can update jobs, you can do a test, you can delete all, and you really just need the path to either a directory where the files, and when I say files, like if you have a defaults file and you have a regular file that has all the jobs in it, you need just the path to that. Or if they're all in one file, you can just point to it and do that. And then this would be the execution that I'm going to show you now. All right. So So here you can see we have basically no jobs in here. It's empty. We do have, we do have some views. So I created kind of a dummy setup of views for project A to project B to show this. So so I'm just going to show, this is just doing the execution. Oops.
Do you have to be a privileged user to do this?
Privileged Jenkins user?
Yeah.
It depends. If your Jenkins requires security, yes, and then you would provide in that ini file a username and password. Or I wouldn't say it doesn't have to be a password. It can be the API token to talk to Jenkins. You can use that as well. Most people use that. Or if, in this case, I don't really have any security, it's just a test Jenkins that I have, so I left username and password blank. But that's the ini file, the configuration file. In this case, I want to update all the jobs that are defined in that. So what I'm going to do is run that. And it's cycling through my projects and updating those. So now we should have something here at least for the service job. And also, it already triggered and set up it set up these. What it should also do is, once it picks up on the fact that this was added, because it's the first time we're adding this, it's going to trigger a Git to check Git for any updates. Hopefully, take a couple. I think I set it for 2 minutes. So, but and now they're already running. So it should be updated in a second. So this is actually me. I put in a service job to call Jenkins Job Builder, and now it's doing its magic to then update my other jobs. And you'll probably see this grow as, yeah. in this case, so I really created like 3 job templates, but because I set up all these different topologies here, I was able to then multiply how many jobs I had. Yeah. And now, just to kind of show you, right, the provision job, if I could see where configure is. There we go. So this has the stuff that was in that job, that site for the parameter. But notice here I have all my SCM stuff checked out. Now I didn't put that in the job template, that was a default, but it pulled it in here for me. Set up the build environment, the default build environment that I set up for the build wrappers to put timestamps in, ANSI, and what else? Timestamps and the coloring, and also to delete my workspace. And then here is the shell code that I had in that job template to run. And then this is then the archiving of the build artifacts, and then the other jobs that I'm going to trigger downstream. So it's basically what I wanted to show is that we can very easily create multiple jobs that way without a lot of code or using the UI. And now if I wanted to either, I could check these into source control, which these are up in GitHub. There's a link that I'll have at the end for that GitHub so you can look at the examples themselves. And then you can also then, if you wanted to give this to somebody else or run this on another master, you could easily set this up and give it out or run it in another environment. So let me go back to projects. So now we should have, these are all the jobs that have been updated, both for Project A and Project B. And now the good thing too is that this is here. We can then, keep this under source control and it will automatically get updated as well. Let's say you wanted to update these jobs, you could have a Git trigger that updates them as well if you wanted to. You can probably kick one of these off. I'm not sure if it will run, but kick that off. That's running. Let me see. So these are some references to the Jenkins Job Builder documentation, as well as the GitHub for this demo. And in the demo, I have all those files that you saw, the YAML files, the Jenkins Job Builder YAML files, as well as like a README, and let me see what else I have in there. And what I did too is I created YAML files for each of the projects that were defined. You also could, in my demo in the GitHub, I separated them into different folders. You could have them easily put them in one folder. So if you wanted to create that Jenkins Job Builder YAML and have multiple projects within that, you could do that. In my examples, I basically did one on topologies and one on architecture, and I switched it up, and I can show you that too if, let's see. I'll show you an update to one of those files, and now how that will get triggered. So here's the one for project A, I believe, yep. With all the different topologies. So let's say I wanted to, I'm going to add another topology to that mix now. We're maybe testing on another platform that needs that. And then what I'm going to do is, and now, in 2 minutes time, which we don't have to wait too long for it. So the provisioning is, that job is still running, which is fine. What we want to see is that this one gets triggered in that time, and in probably a minute, it'll probably get triggered. It should. But I guess while we wait for that, as for feedback, do you guys have any questions now that you've seen that? And we can jump back to that, once that's running, but I figured I'd answer some questions. Yeah, if you want to if you could just go to the mic, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I was just wondering, is there a way to specify an in block, some sort of conditional block with if or an if else in this?
Yes, actually, we use that quite heavily. There is both in the builder step and the post-action or publisher section, you can use something called conditioner or flexible publisher, depending on where you're using it. And Jenkins Job Builder supports that. So you can create conditions that says, if this file, so let's say in your shell step, you created a file for a certain condition, and that file exists, you could then do some action based on that, and you can have that all in your Jenkins Job Builder. JJB supports that extremely well.
Presumably, after you run the tool, the Jenkins home files, like varlib Jenkins, the config.xml and the jobs and all, those get created, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And I was surprised you didn't have to restart Jenkins.
You do not have to no, you don't have to restart Jenkins at all. It's done just talking. There's basically a wrapper, a Python API that Jenkins Job Builder talks to, and that generates the XML file. So and what's nice too is you have these templates that are very simplified, but then it expands into the XML files that Jenkins wants to see, and then the jobs are automatically, you do a refresh in your browser and they're there. I didn't have to restart anything.
And also, you didn't say this explicitly, or maybe you did, but when you have those 3 files with the definitions, I assume that any one of them can override a previous value. Is that not true?
A previous value?
Right. In other words, can you define topology in both the template and then later on override it in a different file?
You can't, whatever is defined in that project section is what those macros are defined as.
Okay.
You can't change them. They wouldn't mean anything in the job templates themselves. They have to be defined in that section, and then they're replaced in the job templates at that point.
Okay, so each value pair
Yeah.
that you define has to be unique throughout the whole
Yes.
enchilada. Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see if we got our job. Let's run. What's that? Yeah, okay, great, perfect. So project A ran the Jenkins Job Builder to update. So what I would expect here now is that we have yet another one that has that topology defined, which I believe it does, the rel 7.1. I'm reading that. I can't see as well as you guys probably can. So it basically added that set. This just means my job failed from running it to provision, which can be any number of things, but I'm not worried about that. As far as the creation, though, the updated job, that was successful, and that's what I wanted to show. Any other questions or comments?
I was just curious if it works with custom plugins as well.
So if you were to develop your own plugin,
Right.
yeah. So we actually have that at Red Hat. There is someone that wrote a plugin to do some triggering off of an internal message bus and also publish that message bus. So they wrote a plugin for that. And someone on our team wrote the Jenkins Job Builder to do that. So this Jenkins Job Builder is open source. You can either add to something that's upstream. In this case, since we were not releasing this plugin outside of Red Hat, we were able to then just load it on top of the existing Jenkins Job Builder when we set up a master, and we could just have it that way. So you can definitely do that if you wanted to.
Okay, sure. And then is there a list of all the supported plugins for the Jenkins Job Builder?
I think in the documentation, if it's not spelled out explicitly like all the plugins, when you go to read about any of the builders or any of those, it says there in a link to the plugin, it says you need this plugin for this to be supported. So like in the case of email extension, if you were to look that up in the publisher's documentation, it would say you need that plugin on your Jenkins master. And if you were to run it and the plugin wasn't there, it doesn't break, but then it just doesn't fill anything in for that. So it wouldn't show up in your master. That's all that would happen.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Any other questions, comments? Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time. The conference.